However, the woman who had appeared so unexpectedly was the first to come to her senses and, apologizing, asked if Joni Moore lived here. Bonnie answered yes confusedly. The woman asked again. Apparently, Bonnie's answer surprised her. No sooner had the woman expressed her assumptions about Bonnie, however, than there was the sound of the front door opening. Oh, finally Joni himself showed up. He was barely over the threshold with the full bags of groceries when a woman shouted his name. Joni obviously hadn't expected to see anyone but Bonnie here right now. "You said you were coming the other day, but is that day today?" Joni asked, surprised, and goggled at the uninvited guest. The woman started to talk about trying to let Joni know she was coming, but Joni reminded her that she had already talked about not using social media. "Miss Bonnie, I apologize for this late introduction," the man suddenly addressed Bonnie. "This is Debbie Moore, my mom," Joni calmly introduced the uninvited guest to Bonnie. After a little while, the three of them were sitting at the table. Joni's mom couldn't take her eyes off Bonnie. Joni jokingly remarked that such a stare would soon create a hole in Bonnie. Debbie apologized, as she realized that she could be so intrusive at times. She added that it was the first time her son was introducing her to his girlfriend. Bonnie noticed that all was well. She looked at mother and son and mentally concluded that they were very different. Debbie was literally glowing with enthusiasm, while Johnny, on the other hand, looked unconcerned. Debbie suddenly began to tell me that her son had never gotten along with girls, even when he got older. Joni wondered unhappily why she was saying all this. The mother, however, continued to talk about her past worries about how her boy would grow up. Oh, is she crying? Bonnie mentally noted that Joni's mother's moods were changing too quickly. Debbie tearfully noted that things had been different before, but now the day had come when her son had a nice girl. However, the tears passed quickly and Debbie remembered her books. A whole stack of books immediately appeared on the table. Bonnie asked with genuine surprise if Debbie had written them all. Her surprise was understandable, since they were all bestsellers. Looking at the books, Bonnie excitedly declared that she already had all these copies, and the girl is an ardent fan of the writer. These books helped the girl a lot when she was feeling really bad. How did that happen? Bonnie took Debbie's hand, wrapping her palm in her own. The girl said she was honored to meet Debbie like this. The woman kindly thanked her new acquaintance for her kind words. Bonnie wondered aloud why her boss hadn't told her about it until now. Joni calmly replied that he simply hadn't known that she might like his mother's books. He was surprised that anyone in Dallas would be familiar with her books at all. Bonnie took the spoon in her hand and, mimicking a microphone, jokingly asked Debbie a question as if she were interviewing her. And the first thing Bonnie asked was how Auntie had started her career as a writer. Debbie thought for a moment. The woman said that something bad had happened to her in the past, but then she met a friend who helped her see the world from a different angle. Then she started traveling and met many people who had a much harder life than Debbie. The reason Debbie started writing was because she wanted to be a support for someone. However, she also had other hobbies: photography, painting, making and selling bracelets and candles. And all profits from this went to funds to help orphans or single mothers. Bonnie's eyes literally glowed with delight. She thought this woman was incredible, and now she realized how hard it had been for Debbie. Johnny was getting tired of it all by now, so he offered to finally get to eating if the fan meeting was over. Soon it was already lunchtime. Bonnie sits alone in the living room, waiting for something. Joni Moore said he wanted to have a word with his mom, and then he'd be right back. I wonder what they're talking about. Bonnie was worried about whether Joni's mother liked her. Despite the fact that the woman had expressed sympathy and treated Bonnie incredibly well, the girl was tormented by doubts about it. The shadow of her past relationship still haunted her, making her insecure about her own worth. Suddenly, the phone rang. Oh, it's Kelly. A friend flooded Bonnie with messages asking how she was doing and if Bonnie was having an affair with her lover. And at the beginning of her and Kelly's interactions, they hadn't been able to talk so serenely. Bonnie remembered that when she and Kelly had met, they'd both been going through a rough time. There was even a feeling that Kelly had felt even worse than Bonnie at the time. However, since they had started talking, Kelly had become so radiant, Bonnie mentally noted. She replied to her friend that a lot had happened in the last couple of days. Yeah, Bonnie had a lot to say. Her life was full of events lately. Just the story with Rachel was worth it. However, Bonnie decided that now was not the best time for that, so she asked her friend not to worry, because everything had been resolved. "How's it going with the guy who's only willing to hook up after marriage? What happened since your last conversation?" Kelly asked in another message. Bonnie admitted that she was at his apartment right now. Kelly was very surprised. However, she really wanted to know the details. Bonnie informed her that Joni's mom was visiting them right now, so she didn't have a chance to text for a long time. Kelly expressed surprise again. "Wow, already meeting Mom?" It was still incomprehensible to Kelly why her mom was preventing her son from having a date. Could she really not take a hint? Bonnie clarified that it was a little different. Finally, the door opened. Johnny came out. He was embarrassed by his mother's behavior and was now trying to explain that he and she were nothing alike. He thought his mother was causing trouble by expressing her feelings so frivolously without thinking. Bonnie assured him that on the contrary, she liked everything about the woman. Joni smiled with relief. He leaned over to the girl and thanked her for taking it so easily. Saying that, Joni leaned even closer. I think he wants to kiss her." "Okay, just one kiss will be enough because his mom is here," Bonnie thought. But the kiss didn't happen in time. Joni's mom left the room too. For a while, she just watched in silence as Bonnie and her son were embarrassed. Debbie had a suitcase in her hands. Heading for the door, she indicated that it was now time for her to leave. "I can't stop my son from spending time with his girlfriend, as if I don't get the hint," she said suddenly. Bonnie wondered aloud. She didn't understand why Debbie was leaving so quickly. However, the woman explained that she had to meet someone, which was why she was leaving. But they would meet again next time. Debbie looked at Bonnie with interest. For some reason, she was suddenly interested in the screensaver on the girl's phone. She noted aloud that she'd seen that picture somewhere before. "Oh, my screensaver! I took this picture when I was in Japan," Bonnie replied. Joni's mom noticed that this photo looks exactly like the one her friend sent her. When Debbie heard about Japan, she remembered that crab dishes are delicious there, and she knew a great place to try crab meat with chili sauce. Debbie promised to tell her about the place and to go there with Bonnie if she got a chance. Bonnie thanked the woman and thought for a moment. It felt like she'd heard something like this before. That's right. What her aunt just said, she's heard from someone else. And that person is her pen pal, Kelly. Could it be? After a little while, Debbie and Bonnie were already sitting together and were amicably rejoicing at such a momentous meeting. Debbie never imagined that her pen pal would turn out to be her son's girlfriend. In turn, Bonnie expressed that it couldn't even occur to her that her aunt could be that Kelly. The new acquaintances smiled sweetly at each other. Bonnie said that Debbie's advice had helped her a lot. And despite the fact that it was a difficult subject, it was unusually easy for Bonnie to share it with Debbie. Debbie replied that she was happy to help if her advice could help Bonnie. Suddenly, the woman's face changed. She suddenly realized that the boy who hadn't wanted intimacy with Bonnie before the wedding was, after all, her own son. The woman decided to ask Johnny directly about it and asked him to tell his mom honestly if he was still a virgin. Bonnie almost choked on her drink at the unexpected question. The girl hastened to quickly reply in Joni's stead that he was very well, and she had even made sure of that a few days ago. "What, really? That's such a relief. I was beginning to think I wouldn't get to see my grandchildren." Debbie smiled. Bonnie felt like she was about to burn with shame at her own words. After they had a nice chat and Auntie went to bed, Bonnie and Joni decided to go for a walk. Bonnie couldn't hide her surprise from Joni that Kelly and his mom were the same person. The girl was impressed and still couldn't believe it. Wow, Kelly was the friend Bonnie met during the most difficult time in her life. At that time, the girl couldn't trust anyone at all because she was betrayed by the person she trusted the most. This was the reason why she didn't meet anyone and was always alone. Bonnie ate, drank alcohol, and watched soap operas alone. This life became comfortable and familiar to her. Then, Bonnie one day accidentally stumbled upon an internet forum called Singles Gathering. It was a forum for people who opposed marriage. One late night, Bonnie was interested in one post. That post was written by Joni's mom, and Bonnie now decided that she would not share the content of that post with him. Bonnie left a comment that day in support of Kelly, and she and Bonnie exchanged a couple messages. Bonnie and Kelly had maintained that momentous relationship ever since. "We have an unusual bond, don't we?" Bonnie asked her boss with a sweet smile. Bonnie admitted that she would never have been able to recover from what had happened again if Kelly hadn't been in her life. And if that had happened, Bonnie would never have met Joni. That's why the girl was grateful to Joni's mom from the bottom of her heart. Johnny looked thoughtfully away and noted that Bonnie's and his mother's situations were very similar. And if it hadn't been for Bonnie, he might never have seen his mother the way she was today. Bonnie wondered what exactly he meant. Joni replied that Mom was always talking about her. Because Joni kept hearing about his mom's friend, he wondered who it was, and then he just figured it out for himself. He realized that this person was Bonnie. As Joni had said earlier, he lived with his mother. Mom lost her parents early, and so she lived with various relatives. She said that she met Joni's father just at that time in her life. At that time, Mom was young and naive, so it was not that difficult to enter her trust. This is the reason why she sincerely loved her father. Yet he betrayed her, one day deciding to just pay her off. Giving the pregnant girl a bundle of money, he persuaded her to take it and leave the country. The father just kicked out the one who gave him all of herself. He must not have wanted her in his life. After that, my mom moved to America, and there she gave birth to Joni. By then, the money her father had given her was running out. So she got a job in a garment factory where she worked every day from morning till night. She worked so hard that she got calluses on her hands. One day, as money was still scarce, my mother started wearing clothes that she had made herself. That's when people around her noticed her. A lot of people started to place orders. Many people liked the clothes she made, so Mom got a chance to open a big store and start a business. Soon, her business was a success, and she and her son were able to move into a bigger house. Joni was overjoyed, knowing that his mom would no longer have to do the sewing. Since then, many people have tried to care for her, but Mom couldn't trust anyone else. Joni thought she had the same reasons as Bonnie. Joni continued his story and recounted that when he grew up, he got a call from a place called Famous Foods. After that call, he was going to have a serious conversation with his mother. Joni made the decision to go to Dallas for a few years. He only had a few details to work out, but the decision was already made, and he informed his mother. Mom couldn't believe that her son had become an adult. However, Johnny dispelled all her doubts by leaving her a bank card. The card had money on it that he had been saving from his monthly paycheck at the company. Johnny knew that his mom had had to work hard to raise him. Now he wanted to make sure that Mom could live the life she wanted and do whatever she wanted. Up to this point, you've only experienced hardship, but now you have to live, Joni said at the time. He wanted Mom to be able to afford to live only for herself, and Mom agreed, being very proud that she had brought up a worthy son and man. Meanwhile, Joni came into the restaurant. Glancing at his watch, he wondered if he had come too early. He was waiting for someone, but his companion seemed to be delayed. He never thought he'd come here like this, to the place where his father abandoned his mother. Oh my God, what is that? Joni froze in mute surprise. What's going on? At the same time, at the same restaurant, Colin proposed to Bonnie, and Joni was watching from the sidelines at the time. In the plate of food, Bonnie found a ring. The girl pulled out the ring in surprise and looked questioningly at her companion. Colin then confessed that he loved Bonnie more than anyone else in his life and was taking responsibility for making her happy. Putting on the ring, he asked Bonnie to marry him. Joni, meanwhile, continued to wait, but was still alone. He felt that something was wrong. Bonnie cried with happiness. After all, marrying for love looked as if it must surely bring happiness. Joni, meanwhile, had no idea yet what would happen in the near future. There was a phone call. Johnny Moore listened to what was being said on the phone, and his face changed. The words were coming out of the phone in a flood, and it seemed to him that it wasn't real. The man's hands were shaking, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. That day, he was told over the phone that his mom had done something to herself. And at that moment, it seemed to Joni that life around him had stopped along with his heart. Hospital, Maryland, USA. A man's hand came down on a woman's arm, all covered in band-aids. Joni sat in the hospital room next to his mother and didn't understand how it was. Why did Mom do this to herself? I mean, she was always telling Joni that everything was fine and that she was happy. Then why? Mom, Joni called out sadly. I just wanted to die, the mother replied without turning to her son. Then she confessed that she had put up with all this time just for the sake of her son. The fact that she had been abandoned by the man she loved tormented the woman, but she had to live while Johnny was very young. Joni, you can move on without me, can't you? My mom asked then with pain and desperation in her voice. She thought she had already done all she could and now she just wanted to leave. Joni didn't understand why she was saying that to him. Tears were running down the man's cheeks. Joni declared that she couldn't die. My mom was discharged from the hospital and was home all the time. She refused to take the pills she was prescribed and kept crying every night, begging to be released. At that time, Joni gave up absolutely everything and focused on his mother's treatment. Every day he was haunted by the fear that she would do something to herself again. Joni had a fierce hatred for the man who was his father. Even in such a difficult moment, he did not remember them. But one day, Joni noticed a change. One day his mom told him that her friend had been betrayed by her young man, who had even proposed to her. Mom was genuinely worried and hoped that her friend would be able to find a worthy partner. That girl was the only person Mom was in contact with. She had the nickname Momo, and she and Mom had a lot in common. The main similarity was never depending on a man. Mom relied on Momo and often asked her advice. In addition, she always seemed cheerful when recounting their conversations. Looking at some scenery, Mom would remember something that connected that scenery to Momo. Even a plain walnut biscuit reminded Mama of Momo. She knew all her friends' preferences and practically everything about her personal life. Joni noted that his mom talked about this girl all the time. She shared almost everything she knew with her son. From time to time, Joni himself was curious about this friend of his mom's. It was thanks to Momo that Mom actually got better. One day she shared her thoughts with her son about starting a new life. She finally revealed a desire to travel and meet new people and try lots of things. She wanted to learn to play a musical instrument, write a book, and take up painting. Mom was finally cheerful and wanted to live the life she wanted to live and do whatever she wanted to do, the way she had always dreamed of doing. Now Joni didn't have to worry about his mother's life. The man again received an offer from Famous Foods, and he returned to Dallas. While at the Famous Foods headquarters in Dallas, he became the boss. Johnny was not without female attention. They openly flirted with him, asking to meet him or have coffee with him. However, the man paid no attention to the girl's attempts to get closer to him. He doubted that he could take responsibility for anyone's life. What if the person he meets ends up like his mother? What if she had to raise the child alone? Joni decided he couldn't just throw something like that away. The elevator arrived at the first floor. The elevator doors opened, and that's when Joni saw Bonnie for the first time. The girl bowed courteously to her boss. That's Bonnie, isn't it?" The boss had already noticed her because he'd seen this girl once before at the... Joni was a little surprised when he met her again. This girl had definitely made an impression on him. After all, she was the one who was said to have spoken out against marriage after her fiancé left her. Joni remembered how happy she had been that day at the restaurant. I wondered, what had made her change her mind? The man headed for the office. As he walked past Bonnie's desk, he noticed that she had left her computer on. But the first rule of the office is that when you leave for lunch, you turn off your computer. Joni just couldn't pass by then. There was something on the monitor that really caught his attention. Oh, it's a pen pal. That was the day Joni found out who Momo was, the one his mom had been communicating with. For a while, Johnny was impressed. He could not believe in the reality of the situation. However, from that moment on, everything fell into place for the man. He could only understand why Miss Bonnie had changed so much after he realized that Bonnie was the one Momo. Johnny admitted that he was constantly watching Bonnie. Sometimes he felt pity, but nevertheless he was also interested. But at some moments his heart felt as if it would freeze. If you think about it, he and Bonnie were complete opposites. He considered marriage as a prerequisite, while the girl was categorically against marriage. But Joni's feelings were growing in surprising ways. It was a relationship that was going nowhere. Every day, Johnny tried to suppress his feelings, until the night Bonnie had asked him to sleep with her. That's when he decided he didn't want their relationship to end with just one night. The man's dream was that Bonnie would not just want to sleep with him, but to build a future together. After such a long story, Bonnie had only one question. Why hadn't Joni told her about it sooner? Joni replied that he was just waiting until she could trust him. The man, of course, was thinking about making sure to tell her about the past. He was going to make Bonnie his and make her happy. Tears came to the girl's eyes. She was able to change because of Joni. Now she could trust people again and make plans for the future with someone. The girl was able to realize again that the world is beautiful. Bonnie threw herself around the man's neck and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, and I love you," she confessed to him. Company office, a new workday. The sound of Rachel's heels definitely drew special attention from her co-workers. The employees were murmuring and quietly discussing Rachel, looking at her with many judgmental glances. Some wondered how she could do such a thing. Some said that looks were deceiving, and some always found Rachel intimidating. Rachel heard all these barbs directed in her direction. Her co-workers, who had been so helpful recently, now resented her coming to work and said they would have quit long ago if they were in her shoes. Nothing had changed. In her mind, Rachel considered the real evil of all her co-workers, who would immediately condemn a person for the slightest mistake. And all Rachel had done was work hard to earn the recognition of people like them. And if she were the heir to that company, I wonder, how would they treat her then? With these thoughts in mind, Rachel was walking along when Bonnie suddenly approached her. In a confident voice, she stated that they needed to talk. Rachel gritted her teeth. In his mind, he hated Bonnie, thinking it was her fault that everyone else was judging Rachel. Conference room. Rachel wondered why it was just the two of them in this room. Elementary school, Laura Gardner, grade 4. That's your name, isn't it, Rachel? Asked Bonnie, puzzled. Rachel thought. Bonnie wouldn't even remember her name after what happened. What an honor to finally remember me. Usually people like you don't remember their victims, Rachel observed reproachfully. Bonnie suspected that Rachel resented her for something in the past, but she didn't understand what it was. I never bullied you. I never even had such thoughts. Bonnie tried to justify herself. It seemed to the girl that there had been some misunderstanding. However, Rachel didn't consider it a misunderstanding the pity and disdain with which Bonnie had looked at her then, during her school days. It must have been fun, finding out about everything and starting ridiculous rumors, Rachel asked suddenly. Bonnie asked Rachel not to lie. She wondered aloud what she was talking about. Bonnie repeated that she'd never treated her with contempt. Rachel, on the other hand, emphasized that Bonnie had always treated her that way. Bonnie could only remember the kids at school talking about how cute their new girl was. They said she was from a well-to-do family, and that they even had a 2-story house. There was a time when the boys tried to favor Laura by showering her with small gifts. Little Laura was embarrassed by it all, but still she accepted the gifts, just so she wouldn't lose her new friends who respected her. She also tried to be nice, and didn't try to dissuade her new friends from their belief that she came from a wealthy family. In fact, these situations were only painful for Laura. She tried to leave the school as soon as possible after class. The girl would come home after school and look around on the way to make sure no one would know where she really lived. When Laura was sure that no one was following her, she raced toward her home. With a quick step, she walked down the steps and found herself practically on the roof of the house where the entrance to her ancestral home was. In fact, the girl and her family lived far from the prosperity rumored at school. Once again, her family had to move to a new place because of debt. But every day, Laura's only thought was that she couldn't let anyone at school know about it. Before dawn, it was transformation time for Laura. The girl changed into her work clothes and went to collect cardboard on the streets. Because her mom was sick, Laura had to turn in waste paper. She did it on purpose at such an early time, while everyone was asleep, so that no one would see her. She planned to do her work quickly and then go to school. But as luck would have it, on one such day, Laura suddenly heard a creak and realized she could be seen. The wheels of a bicycle showed from around the corner. A mute terror froze in Laura's eyes. She had been so afraid that her secret would be revealed, and now it seemed that her fear was about to come true. When Laura saw that it was Bonnie, she was even more frightened. But suddenly, Bonnie took a sharp turn in a completely different direction. Then Laura couldn't understand what was going on. There were two possibilities. Bonnie was trying to pretend she didn't recognize Laura, or she was just choosing to ignore her. I wonder which one of those options would apply to Bonnie. A few days later, the boys at school approached Laura. One of them said that he had heard that Laura's mom was collecting waste paper. The second one ironically said that Laura didn't have a 2-story house, but just a room in the attic. They also reproached her with the fact that Laura's things were not really branded, but just fake. The guys started calling Laura a beggar instead of a rich princess. The noise and clamor in the classroom was interrupted when Bonnie walked in. Laura couldn't see that girl. "This is all your fault," Rachel blurted out, looking at Bonnie with despair. Bonnie was stunned by what she heard. Rachel began to lament that she had lived like hell all the way to graduation, after Bonnie had told everyone about it. Rachel especially resented the fact that despite her shenanigans, in Rachel's opinion, Bonnie always looked at Laura with pity and contempt. Bonnie lowered her gaze and stated that it wasn't true, and that she was constantly looking at Laura and being jealous. Rachel angrily said not to make her laugh. She genuinely didn't understand what Bonnie could envy about her. Bonnie sadly admitted that it was true after all, and that she had always been jealous of Laura. During her high school years, Bonnie always wanted to be friends with Laura. After all, she was so popular, and people were always hanging around her. Bonnie recalled that Laura was nice and wore brand-name clothes, while Bonnie didn't have money for even a knockoff. Those words really surprised Rachel. She couldn't believe that Bonnie was just like her, and even poorer, to be more precise. Bonnie was only now able to talk about it calmly. That morning, however, she was very worried. The girl had to deliver newspapers and milk. Her father had just quit his job, and her family had to live on the money Bonnie earned. That day, she also thought everyone was asleep, so she quietly went about her work. But then Bonnie suddenly saw Laura and was very worried about her telling everyone. It can't be. Rachel stood bewildered at what she had heard. So Bonnie didn't tell you that? Weren't you the one who told me that Mom and I were collecting waste paper? That morning when we met, I was just doing it, Rachel asked. Bonnie replied that she hadn't paid attention to what Laura had been doing because she'd been worried about seeing her. Where's the truth? Was it really just a simple misunderstanding? Then why did it happen? Why did Rachel always worry and try to hide? Even with the way they lived their lives, why did she act like that? The only questions in Rachel's mind right now were, why? Bonnie suddenly said that she used to be jealous of Rachel, but not now. Bonnie didn't know how to forgive her. Besides, she had already given a statement to the police, and Rachel would be punished anyway. With those words, Bonnie turned around, heading for the exit. As she left, Bonnie asked Rachel not to hold a grudge against anyone, because all of what had happened was Rachel's fault. The door slammed loudly behind Bonnie. Rachel stood alone for a while with her head down, pondering what had happened. Bonnie is walking down the hall, surrounded by her co-workers. They happily congratulate the girl and say that they were very surprised when they heard that she and her boss will soon get married. The girls offer to celebrate the news. Ha! You mean they're getting married? Bonnie was also surprised by this news, as much as her co-workers. They also asked if Bonnie had been surprised to hear the news about Mr. Nelson. No one had ever imagined that he would be the son of the head of the company. And Bonnie made him do all the paperwork and scolded him for laughing all the time. Ah, if only she knew. Yeah, and the boss knew about it from the beginning and bullied the guy any way he wanted. Wait a minute. Bonnie suddenly remembered some episodes from the past and noted that she herself had bullied Nelson more than anyone else. We can only hope she doesn't get fired for this. Bonnie noticed a woman asking someone where she could find Bonnie. Oh, that's Colin's mom, Megan Garris. Bonnie approached the woman, asking if she was looking for her. Megan took off her glasses and looked at the girl puzzled. She wanted to talk to Bonnie. The cafe next to the company. Sitting at one of the tables, Bonnie asked the woman what she wanted to talk to her about. Megan tensed up. It was obvious she was having trouble starting to speak. It's like a knife to my heart, but I don't mind you starting dating my Colin again, she said abruptly. Bonnie was taken aback by that statement. She asked the woman what she meant. Megan emphasized that Bonnie should know that she was very lucky. After all, Colin had said that he wouldn't marry anyone but Bonnie. The woman reported that she couldn't let her darling son remain a bachelor for the rest of his life. Next, Megan poured a torrent of frustration on Bonnie. She said she didn't understand what her son saw in her. Don't you have a good family? Oh, and you're not young anymore, she remarked haughtily. The woman believed that the opportunity to date her son was sent to Bonnie from heaven. Megan asked why Bonnie was rejecting Colin when she had nothing of her own. The woman was sure that the girl was just trying to put a price on herself. When Megan once again expressed her confusion about what her son could find in Bonnie, the girl suddenly stood up abruptly from the table. It looked like Bonnie had finally run out of patience. Bonnie confidently stated that her and Colin's relationship was long over and asked Megan to never come here looking for her again. Bonnie also added that it was very rude. Megan stared dumbfounded at the girl. Bonnie said she had to excuse herself as her workday was still going on. Megan jumped up from her seat and yelled at Bonnie that she had no manners at all, and that it took forever for Bonnie to point out that she didn't have a mother. The woman added that Colin really shouldn't mess around with someone who life hasn't taught her anything. Bonnie turned sharply and shouted that she was exactly as she was. She wasn't going to marry a man who constantly complains about his girlfriend and live to a ripe old age with a boy who can't sleep without his mom. Megan became furious at those words. "How dare you!" she shrieked and swung her hand at Bonnie. A stream of cold water suddenly splashed directly into the woman's face. Megan stood there all wet. The water quickly cooled the woman's ardor, preventing her from hitting Bonnie. "What did you just say?" came the sudden sound of someone's female voice addressing Megan. Bonnie just opened her mouth in surprise. It was Joni's mom. Her face expressed outrage and indignation. "What did that potato-faced woman just say on my wonderful daughter?" asked Debbie Moore sternly. Megan stood in utter confusion. The woman had appeared so unexpectedly that Megan was stunned. Debbie asked indignantly if Megan thought her son was the only one who was so good. She emphasized that you can't consider someone else's child inferior to your own. Debbie then grabbed a frightened Megan by the arm and recommended that she shut up if she couldn't say anything intelligent. Debbie leaned over to the woman and told her that if she touched Bonnie again, she would just hit her instead of water. A short time later, Mom and Bonnie were sitting on a bench in the park. Bonnie wondered aloud at Debbie's sudden appearance. She couldn't understand how Joni's mother had gotten there in the first place. Debbie explained that she had just been near the office because she wanted to see Bonnie before she left. Then she happened to see Bonnie and that woman and wanted to stop by to say hello. But Debbie couldn't just wait quietly when she heard the words Bonnie was saying. Debbie was now lamenting that she hadn't thrown the glass at Megan instead of just pouring the water out. Bonnie reassured her friend, saying that she shouldn't have done it anyway. But everything was fine now, so there was no need to be upset. Debbie put her hand on Bonnie's arm. Bonnie kept thinking about the words Debbie had said to that woman when she had stood up for her. After all she had been through, the girl tried to just ignore it. The girl thanked Joni's mom for being on her side. Debbie replied that she would always be on her side, no matter what anyone else said. No matter what happened, she always promised to be there for Bonnie. The woman carefully took Bonnie's hand, expressing her understanding that it had not been easy for the girl all this time. Even though Debbie has said it before, she sincerely hopes that Bonnie will be happy. After all, she was the one who helped Debbie forget her past, so now she wished that Bonnie would never run into trouble again, and that no one would ever be able to hurt her again. Tears came to Bonnie's eyes. She couldn't remember any of her elders ever being on her side. "I don't know if I can say this, but if you want to, consider me both friend and mom," Debbie offered. The woman genuinely wanted Bonnie to have a family she could rely on. Bonnie cried. These were such important and necessary words. Even though she had heard similar things before, no one could really help her. Bonnie thought she would never find someone who would be entirely on her side. But that's all changed now. Morning, new day at the office. Johnny asks on the phone if Bonnie has seen his mom. He wondered if Mom had decided to say goodbye to Bonnie alone before leaving. The girl replied that her mother had said hello. Johnny was alarmed by Bonnie's sad voice and wondered if something was wrong. Bonnie replied briefly that she had no reason to be upset and she hadn't cried at all. The man, however, thought he would ask his mother about it next time. Johnny looked at his watch and noted that there wasn't much time left before the end of the lunch break and suggested that Bonnie get coffee together after he met with his boss. Bonnie agreed and asked where he planned to go. Johnny was puzzled about something. Nelson was standing right in front of him now. Johnny informed Bonnie that he had to meet with someone else and promised to call back later. The boss reprimanded Nelson for being absent from work for more than 10 days. Is he even going to work? Johnny emphasized that if the guy was going to work, he should bring him an explanation tomorrow, and if he didn't, he'd be suspended. Nelson smilingly remarked that that was what a real boss was like, the kind of boss who could reprimand when he saw one. Johnny left and added that they would discuss the remaining details with him later, after lunch. Nelson suddenly thought about it. There was something else he wanted to say before the boss left. "I have an entertaining story to tell you," Nelson said, and he began his story by saying that long ago there lived a man and a woman. The woman was young and beautiful, and the man was rich and wealthy. They had love at first sight, which soon turned into a relationship. Sometime later, it turned out that the woman was carrying the man's child under her heart. But the man did not accept her or their child because he already had a pregnant fiancée. So he sent the woman and the child very far away. He was a terrible man, not worthy to be called a father. But after many years, he remembered that woman and their child and began to look for them. Nelson speculated that perhaps the man simply needed an heir. After all, as it turned out, his and his fiancée's child was incapable of anything. "That's quite a problem," the boy said, chagrined. "Who could be the child of that woman who gave all of herself to a man and then was betrayed?" "Who do you think it is?" asked Nelson. The boss looked at the boy with a nonchalant look. He didn't know what Nelson was talking about. "You must know him," the boy persisted. The boss replied that he didn't know and didn't want to know about who it was. Nelson suddenly said that man would never apologize. It was obvious that the guy was gathering his courage to say something most important. He wished he could apologize instead. Nelson folded his arms. He was very worried. "I'm sorry, I really am, sincerely," he said. Nelson repeated once more that he was sorry and bowed. Boss Joni Moore stood with his back to him. "Hello, President," Joni greeted someone as he entered the office. Joni was invited to come in and take a seat. Joni was told that the department's productivity had increased since he took over the planning team. Director Kim was very complimentary of Joni. Also, the fact that sales had doubled since last year was definitely praiseworthy. The president of Famous Foods by the name of Trevor Farrell said that he had wanted to see Joni in person for a long time, but the opportunity only fell out now. The president requested that Director Kim leave them alone. The director hurriedly complied with the request. When the man left, the president turned to Joni. He said that he had heard that Joni had come from America and asked if he had any plans to return to the States again. Joni Moore replied that this was not in his plans for now. The president looked at Joni and asked if there was any chance that Joni would stay living in Dallas. Joni could not answer that question yet. Trevor Farrell was surprised that Joni was able to get a job with this company, because it's pretty hard to get in here. Joni Moore said that he had been preparing for this since he entered high school. In addition to good grades, he had good references, which was an advantage. The president assumed that Joni's parents must be proud of their son. He was curious to know who they worked for. Joni replied that his mother does a lot of things, publishing books and painting. The president thought for a moment. That wasn't enough for him, so he asked Joni about his father. Joni sighed and said he didn't have a father. Trevor Farrell looked questioningly at Joni. Joni told him that his father had abandoned them before he was born, but even now he was not burning to look for him. Joni didn't want anything from this man. Joni Moore added that he hopes the man expects nothing in return from him either. After a while, Joni was sitting on a bench outside the office building. He looked sad and dejected. Suddenly, someone called out to him. It was Bonnie. She looked everywhere for him, and then she saw him here. Seeing the mood Joni was sitting in, the girl assumed he had already seen the president. Bonnie asked him what was wrong, but Johnny was in no mood for conversation and didn't want to alarm the girl with his problems. Bonnie asked her boss not to keep anything to herself and to tell her if anything happened. She just wanted to help. Joni thought for a long time before answering. He suddenly asked if Bonnie would love him if they decided to kick him out of the company. I wonder what they were even talking to him about. Bonnie wondered if the president was going to fire Joni, but even if he was, who would take the boss's place? Without thinking, Bonnie blurted out that even if he did get fired, she would always be there for him. Joni smiled tiredly. Covering his eyes, the man rested his head on Bonnie's shoulder. There was no need to think about anything like that. He was just happy to be around this girl. In the office, someone called out to Nelson. It was Bonnie, and when Nelson saw her, he noted that he hadn't seen her in a long time. Bonnie hadn't seen him in a while either, and she was starting to worry. She was worried that nothing had happened. "Sir," the girl added more formally. Nelson looked dumbfounded at Bonnie. Nelson asked Bonnie to address him as before. Bonnie coughed awkwardly and wondered how long it had been since the guy had returned to work. Nelson smiled and admitted that he no longer worked here. This admission was unexpected to Bonnie. "I don't think I'm right for this company. You wouldn't know, would you?" Nelson remarked, and thanked Bonnie for everything. It turns out they won't be seeing each other again. Bonnie was sad about that. Nelson suddenly announced that he would wait, and when Bonnie parted ways with her boss, he could come to him. He laughed, however, and said it was just a joke. Bonnie didn't immediately realize he was joking, and she wanted to be outraged, but Nelson simply pointed out that it was unlikely she'd ever get the chance to make such a joke again. Right now, he just had to go. He's made his decision, and while he's still confident it's the right one, he should leave. Nelson looked sadly at Bonnie. He realized that if he stayed here any longer, doubts would begin to gnaw at him. At first, it was a casual interest. Nelson didn't want the company to fall into the hands of someone who knew nothing about it. It wasn't because his mother had called him here, and it wasn't because he was competing with Johnny Moore. Nelson was born into a marriage of convenience. Johnny, on the other hand, was raised by a single mom who was betrayed by a loved one. Nelson only came here because he wanted to see how Johnny lived, and he saw that he was a man without any flaws. He was skilled, hard-working, and never asked for help. However, even though he had a pleasant appearance, in Nelson's eyes he was just an ordinary office clerk, and soon he learned what kind of man had caught his eye. It was a common interest too. What kind of woman could attract his attention? But even with such a seemingly simple girl, he couldn't talk to her. Moreover, Nelson couldn't understand why a man who had been through all sorts of troubles in life looked so unhappy. After all, Joni just needed to talk to her. What was wrong? Then it seemed to Nelson that Joni couldn't do it without him, so he decided to help him out a little. And while he was at it, it was a good idea to bring a little jealousy into their relationship for starters. If Joni gets together with Bonnie, Nelson will be very proud of himself. Guy could see that Bonnie had a liking for the boss too, and he could make that girl happy. A few days later, Miss Rachel resigned and Mr. Nelson also left the company. The atmosphere in the office was the same as before. After all, it happens like that, when the main characters leave the scene of the incident, and immediately everything goes quiet. In the tea room, the girls discuss another great news. Oh my God, their co-worker Sue Ford has been proposed to. The girls congratulated Sue heartily and admired her ring. That's great. But Sue wasn't getting married. So why did she change her mind? All her colleagues remembered that she had only talked about a relationship, not marriage. Sue enthusiastically explained to her friends that it seemed to her as if this man was her destiny, and she would never meet another man like him again. Suddenly, the girls turned their attention to Bonnie. They also remembered that Bonnie had never wanted to get married either. Gemma Lee suggested that maybe things had changed after Bonnie had met her boss. Kim only laughed at that, noting that they'd only known each other for a short time. If they're in a perfect relationship, does it really matter how long they've been dating? Gemma remarked. It seemed to her that her boss was already thinking about getting married. Gemma Lee also recalled that the boss had recently been looking at a wedding invitation that a colleague had given out to them. He had looked at the invitation with such envy. Looking at Bonnie, Gemma wondered if Bonnie had already seen her boss's parents. Bonnie replied that she had met his mom, who had recently visited. Gemma noted that it wasn't easy to meet the parents at that age. She was sure that her boss wanted to ask Bonnie to marry her. So the co-workers should expect an invitation from Bonnie soon? The girls smilingly discussed the first couple in their group. Bonnie blushed embarrassedly, because she and Joni weren't dating for the wedding. But if he suddenly asks me to marry him, Bonnie suddenly imagined what it might have been like. Gemma decided to ask one more thing. She wanted to know now if the boss had seen Bonnie's parents. Bonnie replied that they didn't know each other yet, much to Gemma's surprise. The colleague did point out that in any case, if he was going to propose, he was going to see his parents soon too. In the evening at the restaurant, Joni had invited the girl to dinner, but for some reason she was in a moody mood. What's wrong with her? Joni couldn't understand the reason for this sadness. Is something wrong? He asked Bonnie. The girl replied on automatic that it was fine, but her thoughts were on Gemma's words about how jealous her boss was of the wedding invitation. Bonnie talked herself into thinking about the wedding prematurely, since they had only recently started dating. Besides, it's too early to talk about the wedding considering that not all the problems have been solved yet. Bonnie looked at Joni sitting across from her and couldn't stop thinking about the future. Either way, she enjoyed just spending time with him. It made a girl happy. Was it really worth talking about the wedding right now? The next day, Bonnie got an unexpected text message. The girl couldn't come to her senses when she saw who it was from. Bonnie was texted by her father. He was outside the company now and suggested that Bonnie meet during her lunch break. It was not easy for the girl to decide on this meeting. She remembered how her father shouted that he didn't need her anymore and chased her out of the house. She also remembered the distinct sound of glass from the broken bottle her father had thrown at her. She painfully remembered that feeling of fear of a little girl who didn't know where to look for help and support. The father drank and rebuked his young daughter for wanting to leave him just like her mother. This was the reason why he kicked Bonnie out. And now Bonnie's father, Macon Dahman, was sitting in the cafe right in front of his grown daughter. He looked miserable. Bonnie is sure he didn't come here because he wanted to know how she was doing. Bonnie asked her father if it was because he had come because he needed money. The father admitted that he was already done with alcohol. Ha! And he thinks Bonnie's gonna believe that. The father assured his daughter that it was true, and now he was undergoing treatment for alcohol addiction without missing a single session. He admitted that he had not been drinking for a long time. Did he really expect his daughter to praise him for that? Bonnie couldn't see how that had any bearing on the situation at the moment. The girl reminded him that his mother had already left home, and thanks to him, Bonnie had lived a life that Bonnie would rather be dead. Bonnie was puzzled. Did her father really think she would be happy to see him and immediately forgive him after all that had happened? Lowering his head, her father said he was sorry. "If you're sorry, just don't come to me again?" Bonnie asked. She also added that he is a nobody to her and asked him to never show up in her life again. Bonnie was about to leave when her father suddenly confessed that, in truth, a young man named Johnny Moore had come to see him. "Was he looking for you?" asked Bonnie sharply, turning around. Yes, Joni had asked never to tell Bonnie about it, but his father felt it was right to tell her. Bonnie was very curious to know why Johnny had come to see him and what his father had told him. The man replied that he had said nothing of the sort. Father explained that Joni would just show up and bring a file of documents each time. He asked Bonnie's father to take it all back before it was too late. At first, the man thought it was just some idiot and sent him away. But Johnny Moore kept coming for 2 or 3 days after that. Johnny said that once Bonnie's father put things back on track, Bonnie could be truly happy. He said for the father to sincerely apologize to his daughter, but he wouldn't even consider forgiving her. When Joni handed over those documents, his father found there the address of a center for alcohol addicts. He also paid for the treatment in full. Also in the envelope was an application for a production assistant position at Bonnie's company. This had been prepared by Joni specifically so that Bonnie's father could go straight to work at the end of his treatment. Macon was then surprised at such unexpected kindness from a man towards himself and asked why he was doing it. Johnny said that Bonnie had given him much more than that. Anyway, it was thanks to this guy that Bonnie's father's treatment lasted uninterrupted, and he's going to get a job starting tomorrow. Macon Dahman realized that his daughter wouldn't be able to forgive him no matter what he said. After how much pain he had caused Bonnie, he had no hope of forgiving her. He only realized that he would regret it for the rest of his life, and only after death would he suffer a just punishment. Bonnie looked at her father and couldn't believe what he was saying. She had rather mixed feelings right now. Macon suddenly cried. All he wanted now was for Bonnie to never feel pain again. The grown man had finally realized everything and was now trying to beg his daughter's forgiveness. He really was sorry. Evening came. With a confident stride, Bonnie walks quickly somewhere. She reached the familiar office and swung the door open sharply. The boss was just about to put on his jacket. Bonnie's appearance was unexpected for the man. Bonnie stood right in front of her boss and looked him in the eye. Joni wondered what was wrong. She wanted to know why Joni was looking for her father, why he had helped him, and why he was doing all this in the first place. She didn't dare ask those questions out loud yet, though. Joni helped the man Bonnie had already given up on. The girl didn't understand why she deserved all this. A second later, Bonnie threw herself into Johnny's arms. Only with her head pressed against the man's chest could she feel calmer. Bonnie realized that Johnny was trying to work it out on his own, so as not to hurt her pride, and hoped that the girl wouldn't find out about it. In that case, she should keep the secret for his sake. With these thoughts, Bonnie tearfully tucked herself into Johnny's shirt and thanked him. The man didn't understand what he was being thanked for. "For everything," Bonnie whispered quietly. "Ah, what wonderful weather we have in the spring. It's May. Today is supposed to be the wedding of Lila, the same friend of Bonnie's who invited her and her boss to the gala. Greet the young ones," a loud voice echoed off the high walls. A beautiful couple entered triumphantly into the hall. They were simply magnificent. God, Lila is so beautiful. Bonnie gazed rapturously at her friend, mentally noting her lovely wedding dress. Joni sat next to him and asked if Bonnie was jealous of the bride. Ha! Why would she be jealous? Of course Bonnie wasn't jealous. Johnny asked just to tell him if Bonnie wanted to do the same. He was ready to put a wedding dress on this girl at any moment. The ceremony was over in the meantime, and Bonnie was about to leave. Lila suddenly called out to her friend. She wanted to thank Bonnie that her friend had come today after all. Bonnie stated that there was no way she could miss such an event. She asked Lila if they were going on a wedding trip. Lila was just about to tell her about it, and she also wanted to see her friend before she left. Lila then looked at Bonnie and remarked that her lover is so pretty. Lila thinks he's crazy about Bonnie. The girl managed to notice that Joni was completely oblivious to the ceremony and was only looking at Bonnie. Lila had a feeling that everything would be fine, since she had a pretty good intuition for such things. "And what did you smell in there?" Bonnie asked. Lila smells that she'll get an invitation to Joni and Bonnie's wedding this fall. After talking to her friend, Bonnie went to look for Joni. I wonder where he went while the girl was in the restroom. He had Bonnie's cell phone with him. Bonnie was looking all over for him. Maybe he went into another wedding hall? Bonnie opened the tall doors and saw that her assumptions were correct. Joni was sitting on one of the benches at the very beginning of the hall. The girl asked what Joni was doing here. The man replied that he had just decided to think for a while. Bonnie asked what exactly he needed to think about here. The boss replied thoughtfully that it would be nice to have the wedding here. Bonnie asked him what Joni thought about the very concept of marriage. From the outside, it seems complicated, but in fact, it's much simpler. You just live life together with the person you love, was the meaning the man put into this word. Bonnie smiled. From Joni's words, it did seem easy. Joni emphasized that marriage didn't have to be a burden for two people. Looking at the girl, Johnny stated in a serious tone that he wanted to live the rest of his life with Miss Bonnie. Having missed Bonnie in this life, Joni was sure he would regret it in every life that followed. What just happened? Suddenly the lights went out. Bonnie was a little scared. Was there a power outage? Suddenly a marvelous melody echoed through the hall. It was the sound of the piano. Bonnie was very surprised, and Joni sat next to her as still as a rock. He suddenly stood up and said that he couldn't promise that Bonnie would always be happy being around him. Of course, it was worth realizing that the couple might have disagreements and difficulties of their own making. However, there was something Johnny could promise unconditionally. No matter what happened, he would never stop loving Bonnie. Johnny suddenly took a knee. Bonnie's eyes rounded at this act. She felt like she was about to hear the most important words of her life. Even though the situations would be difficult to overcome, even if the day came one day when Bonnie would fall out of love with him, Joni promised that he would love her. With those words, he pulled out a small black box. "I swear before God that I will love only you for the rest of my life," Joni said, and opened the box that contained the ring. At that point, Johnny asked Bonnie to marry him. Wow, the girl seemed to be speechless. Tears came to Bonnie's eyes. At that moment, she felt that she would regret her whole life if she missed this man. Bonnie decided that she could trust him. She believed that she could be happy if she married this man. Overcome with emotion, Bonnie hugged Joni tightly. "I agree," she said, looking the man straight in the eye. Bonnie repeated her decision to him once more. It was obvious that Joni Moore was overjoyed by her words. Johnny was the one who had given Bonnie the most beautiful and exciting moment of her life. So she wanted to make him happy as she was. Bonnie got a text that said, "Oh my God, Joni proposed to you?" It was written by Debbie, Joni's mom. She agrees without objection and is happily ready to call Bonnie her daughter now. The girl was undoubtedly pleased by such words. However, Bonnie really wanted to talk to Debbie in person, so she needed to know when Joni's mom would have some free time. Debbie announced that she was traveling again. Now the woman was still out of town, so she promised to text Bonnie when she got back. Debbie asked if her son was doing well with Bonnie. The girl replied that everything was fine and he was the same as before. Debbie asked her to let her know if Joni suddenly upset her. Then she'd get on a plane and rush over to Bonnie's. The girl smiled at those words. "Are you discussing me again right behind my back?" Joni's voice came out suddenly. Ha! Looks like Bonnie was caught off guard and tried to justify herself by asking if she'd ever done this before. Joni reminded her of that conversation with Debbie when they'd talked about how there was something not working about Joni and how he was weird and all that kind of stuff. It's all in the past. Back then, Bonnie had actually thought Joni was a little weird. Johnny asked ironically, wasn't sleeping in the same bed something one could do as much as one wished after marriage? And wasn't Bonnie's slowness considered a sin? Bonnie wondered, and which of the two of them was more assertive now? She wanted to know what Joni was thinking after they'd done it. Bonnie thought he was probably regretting it. that he'd refused to do something like this for so long. Joni looked conspiratorially at Bonnie. Oh yes, she was certainly right. So he wasn't going to deny himself that pleasure any longer. In the room on the bed, Joni couldn't hold back any longer. She plopped Bonnie on the bed, despite all the girls' excuses that they had just arrived after all, and would need to eat first. Joni simply said she would get it over with quickly. Liar! Bonnie wondered if Mr. Joni wanted to do that to her. Ha! He didn't understand why he would ask such a thing. Bonnie smilingly asked how she should be. After all, she couldn't share a bed with a husband who wasn't her own. What a twist. Joni looked at the girl in bewilderment. They had decided that they were going to get married soon. Bonnie countered that their marriage hadn't been registered yet. When Joni said that they would do it later, Bonnie replied that they would make love later too. Joni abruptly got out of bed and told Bonnie to get ready. They're going to go register the marriage right now. What do you mean right now? Bonnie was taken aback. However, Johnny pointed out that the registry office was open even on weekends, and if they went right now, they would have time to get married. Soon the couple was getting dressed to go out together. Bonnie mentally concluded that the man didn't get her jokes at all. The girl was engrossed in her own thoughts when suddenly Joni came up behind her and touched his cheek to her hair. Oh, what is he doing now? Joni hugged the girl gently yet firmly, pulling her body against his. Bonnie asked what he was doing, and weren't they going to register the marriage? Of course, they would definitely go there. But first, Johnny wanted to cool down a little, because he thought it was getting hot in here. With those words, he smoothly slid the strap of his shirt off Bonnie's shoulder. At Bonnie's house. It was morning and the girl couldn't get out of bed. Bonnie moaned as her whole body, literally every muscle in it, ached intensely, although that was to be expected from that night with Joni last night. But where did he go? Bonnie got up though and went to look for Joni. The man was just watching TV. What was it that made Joni smile so sweetly? Bonnie didn't think it could be the news he usually turned on. Oh, it's a show about taking care of a baby. Bonnie heard it's pretty funny. Interesting? The girl asked, taking a seat next to Joni. For the man, Bonnie's appearance was unexpected, so he made a nonchalant face and said that he had just turned on the TV and the show was on, and he decided not to switch. You can't tell by the look on his face that it's just a coincidence. Maybe Joni really likes kids, huh? Thinking about it, Bonnie remembered the words of her friend Lila, who spoke of her unmistakable instinct. She asked if she and Joni ever thought about having kids. Then Bonnie replied that they hadn't even gotten married yet, so she hadn't thought about kids yet. Lila was surprised to think that Bonnie didn't want children, but she was also curious to know what Joni thought about it. Bonnie clarified that she and Joni just hadn't had a serious conversation about the subject yet. Lila felt that if Bonnie didn't want children, she should be sure to discuss it with Joni. Such problems should be resolved before marriage. Yeah, the baby talk is a pretty big deal, but it was a very difficult conversation for Bonnie to start. But still, it was necessary to start this conversation, and Bonnie told Joni right away that she had an important matter to discuss before they got married. Since Bonnie didn't recall that they had ever had a serious conversation about children, she would like to know what Joni thought about it. Joni, on the other hand, counter-questioned what Bonnie herself thought about it. Bonnie thought it was a good idea to slowly prepare for it. However, to be honest, she had never planned to have children. Joni visibly tensed at her words. Bonnie, meanwhile, continued by saying that marriage and having children didn't necessarily have to be linked. She believed that they could be happy together without a child. No, she's not saying that she doesn't like kids or that she's never going to be a mom. However, right now she doesn't want all of that. Joni simply remained silent. But at this moment his silence was more eloquent than any words. He remembered that just a couple months ago, Bonnie had never thought of getting married. Joni blamed it on his greed and his hopes of having a baby right after the wedding. Instead, he should be grateful for the fact that she had decided to marry him. Maybe we should take our time and wait. If Bonnie's attitude toward marriage had changed as soon as they started dating, maybe she'd change her mind about kids too. With those thoughts in mind, Johnny said he agreed with Bonnie's choice. Bonnie asked in surprise that he didn't want kids. Joni replied that of course he did, and that would be nice. However, there was no way he would force her to do this. He agreed to come back to it later, when Bonnie was ready. Besides, there were wedding preparations to be made now, so Joni asked her not to think about it for the time being. Hot pieces of roasted meat lay appetizingly on the plate. Bonnie was having lunch with co-workers at the coffee shop, and Kim suggested that getting ready for the wedding was a hassle. Bonnie didn't agree with that opinion, especially since they had already decided on the most important issues. Kim thought that Bonnie was just lucky, because a man like her boss was really hard to meet. Gemma agreed with Kim. It seemed like only yesterday they'd been gossiping about which girl the boss might marry. Gemma emphasized that she had never imagined that the lucky girl would be someone from their office. Joni didn't show up for the company dinner, so the loose talk began. Kim suddenly started talking about the baby. She suggested that if their future baby looked even a quarter like the boss, he'd be so handsome. Bonnie immediately pictured what a kid who looked like the boss might look like. How cute could he be? Did Gemma ask if Bonnie planned to have a baby in the future? Gosh, more questions on such a sensitive subject for Bonnie. The girl replied that she wasn't thinking about it yet. To which Gemma said that as long as Bonnie was young, she still had time to think. Kids. It's not that Bonnie doesn't want them. They're very cute and wonderful. However, the only question that bothered Bonnie was, could she be a good mother? She would like a baby, but not until she was a little more confident. Besides, Joni said he could wait. They didn't have to rush into anything, did they? Geez, here comes the boss. Decided to come after all? Someone said. Even though Bonnie and the boss's relationship was already known to everyone, the two had decided to proceed with caution within the company. Even now, they were sitting at different tables, and yet the boss was controlling Bonnie. He sent her a text asking her how much she'd had to drink. Bonnie took a small drink. In her reply to her boss, she expressed her worry that he must be tired. She couldn't understand why he had come here instead of going home. Joni replied that he just wanted to take her home too. The girl reminded him that there were cabs for such cases, but Joni would feel better if he drove her himself. Bonnie noticed that their co-worker, Puck, had approached the boss's desk. Matthew was surprised that Puck was still back after his conversation with his wife. Park explained that his daughter had just missed her father, so he had decided to talk to her over video chat. Matthew remembered Puck's words about his daughter being 19 months old. She must be so cute. The man offered to show a picture of his daughter. He showed the photo he'd taken yesterday, and Matthew kept admiring the dimples on her cheeks. Puck thought his daughter was beautiful too, like her mother. Puck then turned to his boss, reminding him that the last time he had seen his daughter was when she was only a couple of months old. The man suggested that he see her again. The boss instantly agreed. Puck showed the most recent photo of his daughter, which he took while leaving for work. The daughter was eating an apple and seemed so cute that her father couldn't resist taking the photo. Joni grimaced as he looked at the photo. This baby really did look very cute. Puck suddenly said that he understood the meaning of the saying that said that a child would not hurt even if it hit his eye. This little girl became the main meaning of Puck's life. It wasn't long before Bonnie met up with her father again. He wants to know if his daughter is doing well. Bonnie asked what made him come to her again. It was their first meeting after Bonnie decided to get married. Her father wanted to know how Bonnie was doing and if the wedding preparations were going well. He added that he, as a father, cared about it. Bonnie assured him that everything was fine and asked her father not to worry and to go back to where he came from. The girl got up and got ready to leave. Macon Daman couldn't let his daughter leave so easily. He stopped the girl and took something out of his jacket. The man pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table, even though Bonnie's mother-in-law said it was okay, even if he didn't give her anything. But he couldn't marry his daughter off with nothing. The man explained that although he had tried to save as much as he could, the amount was not as large as he would have liked. Either way, it was better than nothing. That's why he wanted Bonnie to spend that money on her wedding. Bonnie assumed aloud that it was Joni who had told her father to do that. Mr. Macon indignantly declared that he really wanted it for himself. He felt tremendous guilt that his daughter had been carrying a heavy burden on her shoulders all this time. So the man decided to become the right person for Bonnie to help her. His father was willing to do anything to heal the wound he had inflicted on his child's soul. Even if Bonnie didn't want to see him anymore, the father promised that he wouldn't look for her anymore and would just accept it. He begged the girl to take his money. Macon said that Bonnie should know that her mother hated her husband, but she loved her daughter very much. The man considered only himself to be to blame for her mother leaving, and he himself had mistreated his daughter. Her father felt that Bonnie should let go of her feelings of resentment toward her mother and thus stop berating herself as well. Bonnie's father's only wish now was for his daughter to be truly happy. Sitting at a table in the restaurant, with a glass of wine and candlelight, Bonnie noted that it had been quite some time since she had last been here. Was today really a special day? Joni realized that all of their dates lately had only been at home, so he decided to make a reservation. He knew very well that Bonnie liked places like this. The mood was great. Glasses clinked together in a friendly way, promising to make this a romantic evening. Bonnie suddenly remembered their trip to Japan, when they had walked into a wine bar on their last day, similar to the one they were in now. Joni remembered it well as Bonnie calling it a work of art at the time. Joni in turn recalled how Bonnie had knocked on his room after getting drunk late at night. The boss had thought she was sleepwalking then. Besides, the boss remembered well how Miss Bonnie, who had been drinking heavily, had asked him to take off her clothes as soon as he brought her home. That offer had taken Joni by surprise at the time. When Bonnie asked her boss to sleep with her, she was also drunk. Joni thought alcohol was terrible. However, Bonnie thought a little differently. Who knows? Maybe all this happened only because a sober girl wouldn't dare to say such a thing. Even though it sounded doubtful, Bonnie thought that everything had worked out just fine. All Joni wanted to say was that Bonnie should drink in moderation, and in the future, she could only show her drunken self to him. Wow, a cake was unexpectedly served. Bonnie wondered what it was for. Joni looked at the cake, then at the clock and said there was only 1 minute left. The clock struck midnight. "Happy birthday, Bonnie," Joni said, and automatically became the very first person to congratulate her on that day. Oh, Bonnie had forgotten that it was her birthday. She'd never celebrated it before, so it had slipped her mind. Still, she thanked Joni. Joni presented his gift for his girlfriend. It was a watch. Bonnie thought it was quite nice, but she really hoped it wasn't too expensive. Johnny joked that he didn't have to go into debt to buy them. Besides, he had something else for Bonnie. What? Another gift? The girl was very surprised. Wow, it was a gold pendant that Joni had bought before they even started dating. Joni was picking out a birthday present for his mom, but decided that this pendant would be perfect for Bonnie. He ended up buying it without much thought, even though they weren't in a relationship at the time. All this time, Joni couldn't find the right moment, so now he can finally give it to Bonnie. Bonnie thought for a moment. She seemed to remember something. Nelson once recounted seeing the boss at the mall in the women's jewelry department. At that time, he saw the boss pick out a pendant, and from what Nelson said, it appeared to be for a young girl. So this is the pendant? Bonnie was very grateful to Joni for such a gift. It was the first time she was happy on her birthday. Bonnie never celebrated the day she was born. And the fact that Joni continues to give her all these precious emotions, she will never forget. But what could Bonnie have done for Johnny Moore to make him as happy as she was? Bonnie had a sudden urge to ask Joni something. The girl wanted to know an honest answer about whether Joni would be okay with having kids later. And she was also worried about Joni's reaction if she said she never wanted children. Joni thought for a while. To be honest, he's very fond of children. Bonnie knew it. Joni confessed that when he looks at the children, they seem insanely adorable, and his heart overflows with tenderness. He wants to protect them and hug them. He also added that he can't tear himself away from the screen if there are children on TV. Johnny even almost got into a car accident once because he glared at a baby in the car. Bonnie didn't expect him to love kids right up to that point. However, Johnny emphasized that Bonnie still came first for him, and there was no one more important to him than her. He didn't want to have children just because Bonnie had succumbed to his entreaties. Joni Moore saw perfectly well the girl's anxiety and fear when it comes to children, so he could wait until the day when Miss Bonnie actually wanted a baby herself. Bonnie realized that Joni already knew how she felt. The girl suddenly announced that she had something else. She reported that she knew that Joni had found her father, convinced him to start treatment, got him a job, and generally set up his life, taking care of everything. Johnny Moore apologized for doing it behind Bonnie's back without consulting her. The girl gently placed her hand on top of Joni's arm. Bonnie thanked him for what he had done and for all the effort he had made on her behalf. After all, even she, as a daughter, wouldn't have dared to do that. The girl still couldn't forget all the actions and harsh words of her father. No matter how hard she tried to forget, the memories always came back. Bonnie didn't know how she could forget it so easily. Her childhood had been horrible, but now she was determined to forgive her father. Not because he apologized, but for her own sake. To be happy, Bonnie decided to forgive him. She realized that she couldn't start a family with resentment towards her own parents. The girl believed that her own family could only become happy if she herself was genuinely happy. Bonnie threaded her fingers through Joni's fingers, forming a lock, and said she wanted to live, giving even more than he'd given her. Bonnie smiled and said that she wanted to give life to a baby that would be like Joni and raise it in love and care. Yes, now she was ready to do that.